You're listening to the Love Unplugged podcast, episode 156. Are you looking to expand how you connect with your clients and community? An event, whether a virtual workshop or an in-person retreat, is a perfect option. Today, we're going to dive into how you can create an intentional experience that will leave an impact with your community and clients. So let's dive right in. Hey there, I'm your host, Jessica Fergon, and I am passionate about doing the inner work needed to reach your goals. Let me be your guide as we navigate all the fears and insecurities that surface when it's time to step outside of your comfort zone. Along with my knowledgeable guests and industry experts, I'm here to teach you how to reawaken your life purpose and passion and create the steps to turn your intentions into action. Ultimately, my goal is to empower you to rise above those blocks holding you back and start living a life that you are worthy and deserving of. So come on, it's time to slow down, find a comfy spot with your favorite organic tea, and get inspired. Thank you for tuning in to the Love Unplugged podcast. Hello, loves. Today I am joined by the lovely Jessica Sloane. Jessica Sloane's motto is "There is beauty in everything." She is in the business of creating interesting and beautiful aesthetics as a creative director, event planner, designer, and stylist. What makes an experience working with her different than with most is her ability to hold space for her clients. With a background in sociology, she's honed her skills at assessing client values and creating events that are highly individualized. She is widely known as someone who is able to tell a compelling story through creating interesting spaces, conceptualizing and styling events that resonate with you, the client. She's described herself as having always been drawn to finding beauty in everything, even the unexpected. Every detail is part of the bigger picture. Jessica's clients tend to be those who resonate with her passion for artistically transforming a space through sensory and aesthetic experiences. She and her team look for ways to weave in elements that communicate the client's values, then execute events from inception to completion, managing all components of design, styling, planning, and production. In addition to event production, Jessica offers coaching to those interested in training their eyes to see and apply the fundamental elements of styling. Her work has been widely published and can be seen in Harper's Bazaar, Martha Stewart Weddings, Brides Over the Moon, Once Wed, Style Me Pretty, Geraldine, Magnolia Rouge, and more. She was named as one of the best wedding planners in the country. She lives in Nashville with her son and Golden Mix Biscuit. Welcome, Jessica. I am so excited and I'm so honored to have you as my guest. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. Before we dive into your experience and your expertise, I would love for you to share a little bit more about you personally for those that don't know you yet.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And I live in Nashville. I've been in Nashville for a lot of years, over 20. I am actually a divorced single mom of a little boy who's 10. And so I live in Nashville with him and my dog named Biscuit, and have been in the event industry space for now over 13 years. And that has looked a lot like weddings primarily, but we have done a lot of other stuff too. It just, to be honest, I haven't put all of what we've done out into the world since we've primarily kind of carved out this niche in the wedding industry. But yeah, we've done a lot of things like even celebrity events and Kelly Clarkson's album release and things like that that have kind of put us into a different niche market, I would say. And in Nashville, we have a lot of that, a lot of music industry people. And something that I am excited about this year as we continue to expand is I've brought on a director of operations and we do a lot of destination stuff. And so we've gone beyond Nashville. For the last few years, we've been working towards doing more destination work. And so we now have an office on the West Coast as well. So we have kind of boots on the ground there. And then we're starting to do some other things like retreats. I'm actually hosting my first retreat next month. So I'm excited about that new venture as well.
That's really exciting. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to dive into that a little bit later because I want to hear about this retreat and what you have planned. Um, but did you say Kelly Clarkson?
I did. I did an album release party for her. It was actually at her house. Yeah.
Oh
And
my.
like a lot of people, I just mentioned that not to name drop either.
My hands just
But
instantly like started sweating. I'm like, wow, that is the next level.
oh, sometimes I'm like, I forget that I've even done those things. And I've been reworking my website actually. And so that's fresh on my brain today because I was going through some of my old blog posts, and there's some things like that where we don't have images that represent the event very well because that wasn't part of our contract, and therefore I haven't even really put it out. And I was just looking at that today, and I was like, I really need to put this somewhere.
Yeah, that's a huge accomplishment.
Yeah. So anyway, it's just goes to say that we've done some things other than weddings. We have dabbled in quite a few different events, and it's fun to do those things. I mean, that's why I have this personal passion for retreats, and that's more kind of born out of my own desire to tap into a different part of the industry that's maybe not explored very much. And yeah, like you said, we can get into that more.
Absolutely. I definitely think that retreats are on the rise, like workshops, in-person events, especially
Yeah,
with
they are.
the last few years of being so isolated and disconnected. I think that that is a huge push for
Hmm.
those types of events. So I can't wait to dive into that with you.
Yeah, hopefully we are, if anything, we learn to invest a little bit more in ourselves through what we've all been through collectively in the last couple of years. And that's where that passion has come from, less about networking and more about connecting with ourselves and others.
I love that. So let's start at the very beginning. Where did this passion for event planning come? Did you always see yourself as being an entrepreneur, somebody who wanted to run her own event production company? How did this all start?
Yeah, so I actually studied sociology in college. So I had a completely different path and originally. But I also minored in communications, and I had this slight bent towards the creative arts. I ended up taking some photography journalism classes, and I learned that, again, this was quite a while ago, so I learned the old school way on film. Ran a darkroom lab in college. Meanwhile, also diving into sociology and human behavior, I was drawn to that. And coming out of college, then did work as a social worker for like 5 years. Completely, opposite side of the spectrum and what I do now in a lot of ways, but a lot of those skills transfer over. And really, the interest is very similar still. What I am drawn to you and why I still do this job after 13 something years is, the human experience, and also the relationships and connections that we make. And I've landed in this part, like I said, which is primarily weddings, which is the celebration of that. And my passion for being in this industry still is to get to know my clients, what they value, and then how to create an experience around what they value. So that's the most important part for me. And I thank my social work background for that. I was able to learn some really useful tools around assessment and kind of getting to the basic of what is, or the foundation of what is really important. And then also there's a lot of family dynamics in events and weddings, particularly.
Yes.
um, and so understanding that what you're seeing or hearing is not necessarily the full picture, kind of looking for what those clues are. And so I really enjoy that part of the process. And as a designer, not just a planner, not really like just a logistics person, I am more a conceptual person, and often describe it to my clients as a creative director. And so in that role, I am honing in on that foundation with them, and then picturing or visualizing what the event could be and should be based on what they value. And then the planning really is just filling in all of those things to execute what we vision. So it's a little bit of a different process in that way. I have a creative session with my clients from the very beginning that talks a lot about, we talk a lot about what they value outside of the event. And so kind of like a therapy session. So I feel like I lean into that side of me a lot.
I think it's so valuable. I was a wedding planner way back in the day, and
Oh, were you?
the family dynamics does come into play.
Yeah.
I felt like a therapist for a good chunk of the time. You really have to talk the bride and the groom kind of off the ledge at times. You have to sometimes mediate between the family so that things don't get too far off track and everybody's happy. But there's a lot that goes into planning an event, or executing an event.
And everybody has an opinion typically, and a lot of history goes into planning that day as well. And I think it was, I forget now who it was, but there's another planner that literally on their tagline in Instagram, it says something along the lines of like they're an unlicensed therapist or something like that. And I thought that's so funny and so true because we really are one of the more important relationships in that couple's life at that time during
Yeah,
that special time of their life. So, yeah.
yeah. You see it all. It all comes out, which is so funny. I find it so funny that everything comes out at that moment.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's just such an interesting, special time in people's lives, for sure.
Yeah, and for a lot of people, it can also feel stressful, and that is part of my role is to help, alleviate, not only alleviate that stress, but see it before it comes, and help prevent it as much as possible. But there are always things, that are outside of our control too, like family dynamic that's going on behind the scenes, or a great example always is weather and how people handle that. And, so there's always something that people are going to have to manage. And our job, as I see it, is to help with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you definitely have the right toolkit for it. So that's fantastic. Your clients are very fortunate to have you. That's for sure. So you were working in social services. What type of social work were you doing?
Yeah, I was in a couple different roles in the very beginning. Of course, you start, yeah, right out of college, you start at the bottom level, and I was doing in-home therapy actually with primarily teenage kids and their families. Um, these were kids that were either in the system or at risk for going into the system. So they might be in foster care, for example. And then I only did that for a little while because I was also on a team for crisis. And those were kids, and I say kids, again, mostly teenagers, who had made a suicide attempt and they had to be hospitalized, and we were on the team in charge of discharging them. So they were very high stress jobs. And then I took a training position, and for the longest portion of my social work years, I was a foster care and adoptive trainer. So I would teach parents. There's a curriculum, at least in Tennessee, that they have to go through, and then they go through a home study process to be approved and all of that. So that was my role. So it was, again, very different than what I do now. However, I learned some hard lessons during that time, and they're useful lessons that I'll carry with me forever, actually.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. Those are heavy roles, and I think so
Hmm.
important, especially the training one. I'm really interested to know that they have that available, which I think is so important for that family to have that education to be able to support that child coming into their space and their lives, so that they have at least the most success that they can with what's
Hmm.
happening.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, you're in that space. How did you get the light bulb to be like, I'm going to become an entrepreneur?
Yeah, it wasn't a light bulb necessarily. It was more of a process of maybe deconstructing what I thought my career would be. And so after a while, I was basically burnout, much like a lot of social workers tend to be after a few years. And as I was an early 20 something going into it, you do kind of have the rose colored glasses on, and I had more of a mentality that I could make a greater change than what was possible realistically. And so after a while, I just decided this isn't the right avenue for me and I need to try some other things. And so I did. I just started trying different things. And again, that was a bit of a process. And when I personally got engaged, I'm no longer married. So it's also kind of a fun fact about me. I'm a divorced wedding planner. I often joke around that. But I planned my wedding, to the T, and I had bought all the elements for the design and had laid out how I wanted exactly each table. And in that process, sort of in a way became obsessed with it, and it was about the design that I fell in love with that piece. And that is kind of when the light bulb started to go off. I was like, maybe I should be doing something like this. What would that even look like? And simultaneously it was establishing relationships with vendors that also said, well, why don't you do this with us and try it out to see if you like it? And one of the things we did was a styled shoot, and this was back in the day when styled shoots were a thing.
Mhm.
I mean, they're still a
I
thing, but
remember
they've
those days.
evolved. Yeah, they've evolved over time. But I mean, we're talking about 2010. So this was at the peak of like all the blogs having styled shoots up. And the first one that I did with the photographers that were actually photographers for my own wedding was published on Style Me Pretty. And it's kind of just took off from there. It was like, oh, I really love doing this. And I had established some of those vendor relationships. And so they referred me to my first client. And it was definitely a learning curve. I was jumping into something that I had not really done before, certainly hadn't done before professionally and only done personally. And so I remember, learning some hard lessons in the very beginning and just wanting to stick to it. There was nothing about it that made me feel like I couldn't do it. I had more determination probably. And what's interesting is like 13 years later, I look back on as the industry has greatly changed and has evolved so much, how we reach the right client has also changed quite drastically. And for me, it used to be a lot of publications and blogs and that sort of thing. And now our reach is different, but the fundamentals are the same, and that is at the core of what works, especially in the event industry, I think, is relationship and the connections that you make with people. That's who you end up referring to each other, and the connections you make with the clients. That's the same. It's a very relationship oriented industry.
Yeah, your network is everything.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I remember the style shoots. I did a number of them.
Yeah.
Like to an event planner, an event designer, anybody who is a vendor within the industry that can collaborate with other vendors within the industry on those style shoots, like they were everything. And getting them featured on the publications.
Yeah.
Like I don't remember which one was my first, but that moment, like you probably can attest to this as well. The level of excitement is like
Yeah.
off the charts being featured on publications that you like truly admired.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, I'm grateful for all of those opportunities. I'm grateful for the time that I entered into the industry because now it is such a different landscape. So I'm just really thankful that it was a very organic way to start a new career.
So let's talk about some of these lessons that you had starting and growing this business so that anybody tuning in that might be thinking about maybe embarking on their own company that can learn from. So what would you say were your biggest lessons, things that you look back on and you're like, I'm happy it happened because it taught me a lot, but holy crap, it was a lot to go through at the time, or it was a huge eye opener.
I've thought some about this potential question because it is hard to answer as you look back, like because everything that you've learned along the way has gotten you to where you are now. So each thing is valuable. Overall, though, I have seen clients make the mistake of putting too much on Pinterest in terms, and by too much, I mean too much emphasis on or too much expectation. Um, Pinterest is such a wonderful tool. I use it in a very specific way with my clients, but I have also seen it kind of get people stuck on something that isn't necessarily the right thing. So we see things, in our world today where everything is so accessible. We see things that we immediately like or that may resonate with us even. But oftentimes, if you look at the logistics of what's actually happening, for instance, in a photo, or realize that the lighting is potentially different and that's not the color of this actual thing, or this installation would actually cost this amount of money. There are those types of things that we live with today. In the technology landscape today, I think that we are too used to seeing things that are very elaborate that aren't necessarily what we want to achieve ourselves if we were to sit down and really think about what's important and what we value. So I put a lot more emphasis on that when I work with my clients. I have one event that comes to mind. That's a great example where the clients really wanted to impress their guest in a lot of different ideas in a short amount of time to pull off those ideas. And it was also in a destination location. And some of those things were hard to really execute well because I would say their focus was distracted from the thing that was really the most important. So I think overall, my answer is just to be aware. The more aware we are of what is actually the goal and what we're creating and why, to me, those are the things that are always what I come back to.
That kind of sounds a little bit like somebody going into the business and wanting to please their client so much that it clouds their awareness of what they truly want. You know what I mean? Like they're just
Mm-hmm.
kind of going with everything that they're saying just to make them happy. But in the end, it's actually not something that they should be allowing their client to go off on. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, that
Yeah.
totally
So
makes
often you
sense.
can go over budget with that kind of mindset. So often you can put too much emphasis on something that is not as important as something else.
Yeah.
Um, in this particular instance, the couple ended up hiring a caterer way too late in the game because they were more concerned with other elements. And so that caterer ended up dropping the ball and didn't show up like they were supposed to. They were late. They were understaffed. And it was not a caterer that I had recommended or vouched for either. So to give an example, I just think if we lose sight of what we're actually trying to do, then, and this is true, in any area of our lives, um, then often something kind of falls through the cracks, or isn't executed well. And it is my job to execute things as seamlessly and as smoothly and beautifully as possible. So you really have to trust the people that you're working with. And when you build your team of vendors for any event, that is, that is what it will make the event successful or not. So I, that would also be my follow-up advice, just when you're creating your team or hiring your team. And hiring a planner or designer in the beginning is the person that will help you curate that team well.
When you were growing your business or like in the initial steps of it starting, were you by yourself? Like, what were your steps in growing that business? Like, did you just hone in on creating relationships with vendors? Did you like hone in on your marketing strategy? Like, what were your steps in getting to a place where you could actually like build out a team and have more support? And
Well, I've never been good at marketing, so it definitely wasn't that. But I will say that I think I focused on relationships with the vendors. A lot of vendors are I would call frienders, like we became friends. And I think when you can collaborate really well with people and can also trust the people that you're working with, um, then strong relationships are built, and that shows up, I think, in your work. In terms of investing I was alone for sure. And I ended up later investing in building my team. But I have had some people in terms of being on my production team who've been with me for 7 or 8 years. So that did start early, and some of those people are still with me today. And I'm very grateful for that because, again, like those are relationships that I have that no matter what else they're doing, they're going to come and choose to work a wedding with me because they enjoy it. And I think if we're enjoying our work, that also shows in how we're doing our work.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about, we've kind of dived into weddings a little bit, but let's shift gears and talk about like workshops, retreats, those other types of events, specifically for business owners that are wanting to create connections with their clients and their communities and really wanting to step up in that regard. So what would be your overall planning process in regards to creating a retreat, creating a workshop? How early do you start? What are the types of things that you make sure that you include in the planning stages or the execution stage?
Yeah, I have a process that I take my clients through that is similar to what I also do myself. If I, for instance, this retreat that I'm going to do in April, I'm producing myself. I have a photographer friend who's co-hosting it with me, but it is all born out of what I envisioned. And similar to the creative process I take my clients through, we will look at words and language in terms of what we value and resonate with. And we'll talk about that in a big picture kind of way, not about an event in particularly first. Again, looking at why we are creating something before we ever get to what and how we're creating it. So I have, like I said, a word exercise, but also then pair that with a visual exercise. And from those things, and it is a lengthy session generally, and typically one of the first sessions I have with clients, we will come out of that with a vision and a mood, and what I call a mood board. And instead of just an inspiration board or design deck, which is more involved later, it's not a literal representation. It is more about the feeling that we want to evoke and also how we want the event to be experienced. So we talk more about that. And that is a process, again, like for my own retreats, before I put anything into the world about hosting a retreat or even started making plans about it, I really had to sit down and think about why do I want to host a retreat? What's the point of the retreat? And for me, I know that, and especially through COVID, a lot of us have maybe interests or dreams that have been unexplored or untapped. And if we feel like we haven't had the opportunity to do that, or we've looked for opportunities, those tend to be in like education programming. And instead, I wanted to create a space for it. In my life, a lot of things that have been really rewarding to me have worked out organically, much like starting my career. Um, I feel like if you set the space and the intention around space, then those things have the opportunity to grow organically and to develop. And in an event, I think you have to put a lot of intention around what you're creating. And obviously setting the space is what I do. That to me is the core of my job. Um, I cannot force people to create connections when they're sitting at a dinner table together, but I can create the space and opportunity for it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Yes, it does. What would be things that you would recommend that you're willing to share that would help create an experience or ways to encourage people to connect with each other at an event like a workshop or a retreat?
hmm Yeah, I do think it's a little bit different. I think of it as a different approach for a retreat versus a big wedding. In a retreat or workshop, it is a little different than an event in the sense that you can lead with prompts. You can start discussions. You can ask a question. And I tend to dialogue that way anyway. I ask a lot of questions typically when engaging in a conversation and connecting with others. That isn't as conducive to a larger scaled event. However, I think you can design an event in a way that encourages smaller breakout conversations. So soft seating and lounge areas where people are moving, they might move away from their dinner table into a different area at one part of the night and have a conversation with someone else. Even the way you set a dinner table, thinking about something as simple as not having a centerpiece that is obstructing one person on one side of the table from the person on the other side of the table. Um, I've done a cocktail napkin recently at a wedding that had a fun fact about the couple that people probably didn't know. So it was kind of a conversational piece included on the cocktail napkin. So I do think there are small details that can be incorporated, as well as, more macro things like how do you do the layout, and how do you design that well, and how's the flow of the event. Even, when, especially in talking about a wedding, we'll look at the guest experience from point A to point B to point C. Are they standing at the bar for very long? Are they feeling like they have to be herded from one room to the next? Like, how do you avoid those types of things and make the whole event feel smoother? I think those elements, which help people feel more comfortable in general, are also a part of helping people connect.
Absolutely. When it comes to designing the flow to be easy to digest, right? People are going to retreats mostly to like learn to do self development, to really take in a lot of different information. How much time do you think is needed in order for them to feel like they're not drinking from a fire hose? You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
how would you suggest that you structure your schedule to allow some time for them to breathe and to digest everything that they're taking in?
It is interesting you asked that about the retreat, because that is exactly what I have done, for the retreat that I'm hosting in April. And basically, I followed my own rule of editing. I tend to, as a stylist, and we haven't talked about this very much, but when I style something, like for instance, an invitation suite, like a flat lay with a photographer, I have learned over time that less is typically more for me and for my aesthetic. And so what I will do is I'll start somewhere and I end up taking things away. And I will look at, what's distracting me from the subject of the photo. That is similar when you are creating an event. More is not always more. Sometimes less is more. When I was coming up with the programming for the retreat, I approached it that way. I wanted there to be things to do, and yet for those things to be optional, and also for there to be built in free time. I have gone to fam trips and workshops myself where everything was scheduled and it didn't allow for much space to just sit a little bit longer and have a conversation with someone, or rest, or call your family at home in between something. There are a multitude of opportunities when you're in a different environment and you're taken away out of your regular schedule. And often I think we have those epiphany moments and creative inspiration during those times if we have more space. So I think my overall answer is to have more space in a schedule for those things to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about pricing events. This is something that is a huge hot topic, I find. Everybody, I've worked with a client who did retreats as well. And obviously, the external person, so the customer, the client, has their price point in mind as to what they think that they want to pay for something, which doesn't always equate to the value that is being provided through an event. So,
Yeah.
what would be your suggestion in how to figure out exactly what you should be pricing something as?
In terms of how long you've been in business, I think that's one thing to first consider. Generally, as we've been in business longer, we have a better understanding of what our value really is. And I can tell you the amount of hours that I spend on one event, now is very different than when I first started out, because I didn't really know what I didn't know. A lot of years of experience have got me to the point where I know how to plan for things that could potentially happen or go wrong. And there's a multitude of backup plans in addition to spending time investing in creating and designing that event, like we were just talking about. There's a lot more intention in that. And that does translate to more time spent. So I personally think that this industry it certainly can be undervalued, but primarily because there's not the education around it. If you take a wedding couple, for example, and they're getting married for the first time and they haven't done this before, and you're one of the first calls they make, they might be shocked by the price tag of things. They're often, I would say 99.9% of the time, actually, are very surprised because they just don't know. And I tend to have conversations around this that are in a discovery call where I end up educating the client on what things actually cost, and looking at a per head number is sometimes often, or not sometimes, excuse me, looking at a per head rate is a better determinant of a budget than just one big flat number. Um, and usually it's easier to digest for people because then they feel like they have some control over that too. They can control how many people they invite to the event if that's driving up the cost. In terms of my own services, I have a good sense of if a full service design, planning, and styling client wants to hire me, how many hours and time that is going to take versus someone who just wants to hire for design. And so they're priced very differently. I do think that in the creative world, specifically with design, that should be considered intellectual property. And when you're taking from someone's ideas, you're taking from their expertise. I mean, there is value in that that should also be recognized and priced accordingly.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree. When it comes to client experience, I just kind of want to go back to that. What is the order in which you find is most important when you're putting on an event? Is it, figuring out your why, figuring out the high level, the words, the emotions and whatnot, and then the mood board, and then the client experience? Or is it really important? And we're talking from like a retreat perspective, like putting on an event for your clients and your community. Is it, do you think, more critical to figure out exactly what that experience is going to be like for them and then tapping into the other areas of the event?
Yeah, I think again, like I think the why is the most important because it keeps you focused on then how to fill in the other things. So for me, just as an example with the retreat, I have made the retreat have some optional components. For instance, you can choose to get a massage or not. There's free time built in for everyone. You can use some of that free time to get a massage. There's a yoga movement class that's offered in the morning. But if you want to sleep in and not go to that, you can. Like I think having some flexibility within whatever you plan is important from a retreat perspective. But there are some things around that too that I wanted to make sure we had time for. So, journaling, for instance, a nature walk, and connecting with each other in nature. I thought those two elements were going to be really important for this particular retreat. So, they're on the schedule.
Amazing. Okay. This is a side question, and only because I'm an ops expert. So I'm very curious, and I'm sure that those starting out in the events industry who may not know exactly what to implement in their business to support them in serving clients and to do their work, what type of systems do you use in your business to support you?
We use an online system called Aisle Planner. We do have to pay for it, but it is a great online resource for people who are event planners. I use a different online resource for layouts. I use my own document that I've devised for my timeline, just because we've used it for so long that all of my production assistants also know how to read it, and for me it's better and more useful than some of the templates that you can find on your own, and it's much more detailed. We use a lot of Google Docs, of course, emailing, but I will say that Aisle Planner is just a make or break kind of thing for us, especially for a wedding, because it has a master checklist and everything's customizable. So we've customized kind of our forms within that. I could also mention for design decks, I use different programs as well because I've devised a way to put together a visual, both for mood boards and then the overall design of the event. And in a design deck, it's broken out by the mood board, the color palette, and then each moment of the event, and then any other design elements like paper, attire, those kinds of things. But I think that tangible visual as a deliverable to people is really helpful. Even maybe more so, I would argue, than doing like a mock-up, where in a mock-up you may or may not be using some of the same flower elements because they may not be in season, etc. I like to create a visual that will give them kind of a breakdown of what each moment or vignette is going to feel like at their event.
That's super important. A lot of they need to see it. They absolutely
yeah
need to see it. Yes.
Yeah.
Experience that. And you're absolutely right. Sometimes doing the mock-up, it doesn't always work out the way that you think it will, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I think you were going to ask about my services, so that kind of leads me to that too. I am primarily full service event design and planning, and then also styling, because I always build that time in with a photographer too in our timelines. But then I do offer that design service separately, a la carte, for people who either are working with a different planner or planning themselves. I also offer consultations. Sometimes people are just getting their footing in the very beginning and don't know where to start. And sometimes just an hourly consultation here or there is all they need at the beginning. That may or may not turn into something else, because we can offer partial planning. We don't do a ton of that, primarily because people hire us for full service, but we can offer that. And sometimes people end up piecing those things together along the way. And then also do some coaching. So for people who are either planners like myself or even a photographer who's interested in styling. So we also do coaching sessions on styling. And we've done a workshop before specifically on teaching the elements of styling and the foundations of photography composition, and how those things work together. And then obviously we like to host retreats now. And I'm interested in expanding that portion of my business into more retreats, workshops, even for other people, helping host for other people, corporate events and other private events as well. And then also I do styling as a prop stylist. Generally, I'll get hired for commercial work or editorial work. So I do that as well. I've actually worked on a TV show before as a prop stylist. So a big range of things but they all somehow work together.
It must be so amazing to look back over your whole career, like where you are today, everything that you've accomplished to date, and then just look back as to where you started. You know, brand new in the industry, did not have the education or anything like that behind you at that point. And, you know, getting your foot in the door and working with vendors and building relationships all the way to today, like that's like mind blowing.
Well, thank you. It's humbling. Actually, it's, I feel grateful for having the career that I've had and being able to continue it and expand. I'm really thankful for that opportunity, especially as a creative person. I think that's what helps us stay inspired and do our best work.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So if anybody wants to learn more about you or the retreat that's coming up, where can they connect with you? Where do you hang out the most online?
Well, certainly on Instagram for sure. It's, just my name. All of my branding is my name. So Jessica Sloane. Sloane has an E on the end. And I'm about to launch a new website as well. Maybe it'll even be out by the time this podcast is out. And it's jessicasloane.com.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Jessica, for sharing your expertise, sharing your story. I'm just so honored to have you be able to share how we can create more meaningful events and what goes on behind the scenes in putting something on to that scale. So thank you so much for taking the time to share that with us.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a fun conversation to have, and I appreciate it.
I'm Jessica, and thanks for tuning in today to Love Unplugged, the podcast. If there are any questions or topics you'd love answered on the show, head on over to www.projectloveco.com and share your request with me. If you haven't yet, go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast and share it with a loved one. Your feedback means the world to me, and the community we've created is what fuels our discussions here. After all, this is all for you. Join me next time for another unplugged conversation.